Hi, everybody. Welcome to Women in Politics 100 Years Later. My name is Amanda Chu. I'm from Ellevate Network, and I'm your host for today. Thank you for joining us. So just in case you didn't know, Mobilize Women is a movement based on Ellevate Network's purpose of achieving equality for all. We work towards equality by giving diverse voices, particularly those of women, a seat at the table where decisions are made. For those who are not familiar with Ellevate, we're a coalition of ambitious, supportive women and allies who show up for each other and mobilize to change the culture of business. We believe that no matter what your goals are or what your challenges you're facing, having people you can turn to is invaluable. Today, we believe that highlighting diverse voices, opinions, and stories are even more important than ever. During these challenging times, we couldn't host our usual full-day summit, so we put together something perhaps a little better with a week-long virtual experience. If you haven't already, you have 2 days left to register for events where you'll have a chance to engage in candid discussions with some of today's most thought-provoking leaders. Then, in our signature events, you'll get a chance to meet and develop relationships with other people who, like you, want to use their power and influence for equality. Because our community is the largest of its kind, we know that navigating a sea of faceless connections is a waste of time. That's why we strive to prioritize creating the real, authentic relationships that can make a difference in your future. This is achieved by making sure that all of our programming, from our local in-person events to our 12-week squads program, and of course, through our virtual events, that you'll get the opportunities to meet and grow relationships with those who can support you, all the while brushing up on topics that are relevant to you. Today, Mobilize Women is no exception. Our capstone event lies at the center of our mission. It's through Mobilize Women that we take the time to reflect on our own journey, commit to making a mark on our workplaces, and to using our voices and power across the community at large. Because change doesn't happen at the wave of a magic wand. It's up to all of us. During today's session, we'll be joined by incredible speakers, so be sure to stay tuned until the very end, where the questions you've put into the chat will be answered. So throughout the session, please use the chat to engage with each other, our speakers, quote cool things that you hear to amplify the message, drop helpful links to life-changing books, websites, and apps. Also, you can click CC or closed captions icon to turn them on. If there are ever any instances where you need to privately message the Ellevate team, we're identifiable as the host and co-host of this session and have Ellevate in our names. As a reminder, we are recording this session and streaming to Ellevate's Facebook page. The recording will be available on the Ellevate site for your watching or rewatching convenience. And don't forget to get social by using hashtag #MobilizeWomen to share what you're learning. We're big, we're global, but we're in this together. Last but not least, and very much related to this session, we've partnered with the Civic Alliance, a growing nonpartisan network of more than 130 member companies that have come together to champion civic participation, meet the unique challenges of the 2020 election, and build momentum for higher voter turnout this November and beyond. Remember, your voice and your vote matters. Text Mobilize to 26797 to get help registering to vote, make a plan to vote, and keep track of voter deadlines. Before we get started, let's set the stage with an important announcement, or message, I should say, from Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, who unfortunately couldn't be with us today.
Hi, I'm Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, and I'm so pleased to welcome you to Mobilize Women Week 2020. This week, you join to raise your voices and celebrate the power during a pandemic that continues to ask more and more of women. Community has never been more important. As we think about our nation's recovery, we must do more than go back to a normal that wasn't working for working parents. Building a new, supportive workplace culture is a responsibility we all share. And I'm so looking forward to hearing the ideas and solutions that come from these events. I want to thank Christy Wallace and the Ellevate Network for their commitment to fostering gender equality in the workplace and fighting for diversity and inclusion. The more that women see the power of their potential and the value of their voices, the more we will be able to drive this country forward. Have a great event. Hi, I'm
Such an incredible way to kick off this event. So thank you so much again to Senator Gillibrand. And like she said, community has never been more important, and we must do more than going back to the old normal to drive this world forward. Now, let's continue our discussion about women and politics and how we can make an impact. Please welcome your moderator, Aditi Janeja, Council at Protect Democracy, for a conversation with Bushra Amiwala, youngest Muslim elected official in the US, Christine Hellquist, CEO of Cross Border Power and 2018's Vermont Democratic Governor nominee, and Shaniqua McClendon, Political Director of Crooked Media.
Thank you, and welcome to everyone. As Amanda said, you should certainly feel free to put any questions you have in the chat, and we will try to get to them as we are going. I'm really excited to have this conversation with all of our guests, Christine, Bushra, and Shaniqua. The first question I'd love to pose to Christine and then to Bushra is, what made you decide to run for office?
You know, being that I'm a transgender woman and I spent most of my life in hiding, I became very hypersensitive to issues in terms of judging people for things other than who they are. And I never saw politics in my forward looking. But after November 9th, 2016, when I went into political depression, I came out and started to be very active. I did a lot of marching. I went down to the Women's March in Washington. I marched in the Climate March. I marched in Vermont. But in Vermont, my 96% white state, we really never experienced any outward signs of racism. But we started to see white supremacist activity in late 2017. Then in January 20th, I was down at the state for a youth march, and I listened to these 4 young women. They were seniors in high school. They were doing slam poetry, and they called themselves Muslim Girls Making Change. And I listened to those girls, and I cried. And that's when I made the irrational decision to run for governor. And it was really out of civic duty and really came from my heart, because I did not like where our country was headed.
Yeah, thank you, Christine. Bushra, I'd love to know your answer to the question of why you decided to run.
Sorry, I was muted. Similar to Christine, I didn't ever foresee politics in my future or anything of that sort either. It's something that wasn't really appealed to me. It wasn't really something I surrounded myself with growing up. But it wasn't until my senior year of high school where I took an AP Government and Politics class, and for the first time was engaging in conversations with a lot of my peers and my friends in that class, and found out that a lot of them would be voting for Donald Trump to be president. And I remember I had a pretty just skewed perception of what being Republican looked like to me. So I wanted to get a firsthand look of what that looked like. And because of that, I actually interned for our Republican senator's campaign. There was someone on that campaign that asked me to run for public office. I was super involved in civic work and volunteerism and giving back at that scale. And the best way to make long-term tangible change is through public policy. So decided to bridge the gap through there. And when someone asked me to run, I didn't even realize that I was old enough to do so, that I had the qualifications necessary, the means necessary to do so. Kind of took the leap and did so anyways. And I feel like ignorance is bliss. I tried to running for political office the first time.
Great. Shaniqua, I know that you worked on the Hill after being an intern at the White House, which is definitely another way of being part of this process. And I'd love to know why you decided to spend time in DC, why you wanted to work on the Hill, and I'm sure you know people are very frustrated with Congress these days, and we'd love to, if you could share some of your insights on that.
Sorry about that. Frustration with Congress is why I left the Hill, but why I initially decided to go there. I was interning at the White House when the Affordable Care Act was passed, and that was a very cool experience. But what I noticed was once the bill was in Congress's hands, the White House was more of a cheerleader, trying to push things along. But it was Capitol Hill, particularly House Democrats and Nancy Pelosi, who were able to get the Affordable Care Act passed. So I thought, okay, interning at the White House is very cool, but I would like to be on Capitol Hill where, they're actually writing the policies and getting them through and working more directly with constituents to understand what they want. And unfortunately, once I got to the Hill, I started in August of 2010, which was a few months before the Tea Party wave. And Capitol Hill really opened my eyes to some of the really nice parts of government, but a lot of the undersides. And, at that time, we started to see a lot of gridlock and just a lot of partisanship. And Congress barely passed any bills. One bill, education, was something that was really important to me. And I was really excited to work on the policy area. But then when I started actually working on it, we tried to reauthorize No Child Left Behind 3 times in the 6 years that I was there before it got reauthorized. But by the time it did, I'm a Democrat and I was working for Democratic member, and we weren't in power anymore. So it was a really watered down bill that I think didn't do as much as it could for students. But ultimately, I did leave the Hill, realizing that the policies I wanted to see were not being advanced. So we needed better politicians, which is why I ended up where I am now.
So I wanted to ask each of you, what do you think we have so many people who are watching this right now who could possibly run for office. And I would love to know for each of you or get involved in public service, and maybe not as like a member, but behind the scenes. And I would love to know what you think the barriers are and the barriers you had to overcome. And I think we all know that there are external barriers, but I'm actually really interested in your internal journeys and like, what was the thing you had to change in your mind to be like, oh shit, I could do that. And so maybe Bushra, since you're just first on my screen, we could start with you and we can go through each person.
Yeah. For me, I think the internal barriers were just like all of the insecurities I had, and the inadequacies that I felt in terms of serving at this capacity and at that scale. And I think my age had a lot to do with it, where I was like, every single time where I think something would come up that perhaps I wasn't as well versed in, I would always think to myself, well, is this because I'm like not old enough or like not as experienced as someone else? Is that why I don't like know what's maybe like I'm not or know this, or is it just something in general that like you have to just take a bit more time to learn something on? So I feel like that's something that was always lingering in the back of my mind. And that was something that I held internally, but externally, it was almost conveyed by others as well. And it was sort of like my weak point from both sides. But the best part about overcoming that was I realized that me being young was actually one of my strengths. Like people loved that I brought this fresh perspective to the table, that it was like this young, youthful voice. And because of that it actually gave me a lot more clout and publicity and but also attention. And with that, it was just generated a lot more excitement for people as well to see something like that. So it's so funny because what was my insecure point, my weak point, what people would also in the beginning say to almost put me down, my age, was something that was used to my advantage later on too. So I think there's just facets of your identity that sometimes can be that weakest point, but doing something in spite of your insecurities is all the more impressive to be done with that anyways. So that's probably what my biggest learnings and takeaways from that would be.
Great. Shaniqua?
Yeah, kind of in that exact vein, I grew up in a low-income single-parent household, and working on Capitol Hill is, you don't make a lot, but the people who work there have a lot. So when I got there, I felt like I didn't know anything about politics. I had this White House internship. Like a lot of people, Barack Obama just really inspired me to get involved, but I was not well versed in all these issues. And I was supposed to answer the phones, talk to constituents, and field their questions and a lot of their frustrations. And, my coworkers, a lot of them had political ties back in the state that I'm from. I'm from North Carolina, or they had just been in this space and were really comfortable. And on the low income part of it, people wear suits every day on Capitol Hill. They're dressed to a T, and I was trying to piece together my outfits best I could to look as nice as I could. And, those insecurities never really left me. And then I went to Harvard for grad school, and they just compounded even more. And I remember speaking to a woman who had grown up poor. She had gone through the Kennedy School as well. And I talked to her about my insecurities about speaking up, about my life experiences and how they related to policy, but not, but feeling insecure about even sharing those life experiences. And she said to me, you're no less than these people. You're not less, you're just as smart as them. And just because what they know came out of a book doesn't make it more valuable than what you know from your life experiences. And that has just stayed with me, and really, it's made me reflect on the fact that, yes, when I was working on Capitol Hill and got to weigh in about policy decisions that my bosses were going to make, those were from my experiences. And I would beg to say, no one wants policies made solely based on what data someone is able to pull out of a book, because people's lives are real and their lived experiences. And those are the things that we need to respond to.
Yeah, Christine, the question was, what were your kind of internal insecurities that you needed to wrestle with in order to decide to run for office?
I should tell you that, prior to my transition in 2015, I spent...
I'm sorry, Christine, could you turn up your volume? We're just having a hard time hearing you.
Yeah, I'm not sure how to do that. So let me see if I can do... Oh, yes, I see where to do it. Hang on. How's that? Is that better?
Much better.
Okay, thank you. All right, so I'll start from the beginning. I transitioned in 2015, and I was a CEO of an electric utility, which is like one of the most macho businesses that exist. I always said, God, why couldn't I run an artist colony and transition in an artist colony? So I spent 5 years preparing for that transition. And when I first met my counselor in 2010, she asked me, what do you need from me? I said, well, as a man, I'm very strong. I'm a confident leader. But as a woman, I'm weak and full of shame. So we spent 5 years preparing. So when I transitioned 2015, I became a very strong leader as a woman. So running for office, I really didn't have any insecurities. And that may be hard to take. But remember, I spent most of my life as a man. And we could talk about that later. So, Fox News accused me of having transgender privilege. Well, there may be a little bit of element of truth in that, because, if we want to talk, I understand that difference between those two genders. So I had a high level of bravado already.
That's really interesting. And I definitely am sure we'll want to circle back to that. I think a question that many people wrestle with right now is with the election coming up, we're 60 some days out. But I think even outside of the electoral context, what can I do in my community to make a difference, to make a change? We talked a little bit about running for office, which is important and great, but lots of people do other things and are passionate about their other work. And the world seems to constantly be on fire. And I'd love to hear from each of you what you think that people can do to get involved and to try to contribute to the change, given that, people's resources, their privilege is all very different. And again, maybe we'll just start with Bushra and then kind of go down the line.
Mm-hmm. Staying connected and plugged into everything is so important right now, where it's so easy to be disengaged, I think, and almost turn a blind eye to what's going on. But I think what I found is the greatest way to have an impact, especially during COVID and everything that's happening right now, is to volunteer. Your time is the biggest blessing that anyone has, and to give that time to an organization that's in need, I think, is a really good use of that. So I would say volunteer, volunteer, volunteer. And I know that sounds really it's easier said than done, or where do I even begin? I always say, look towards your local food pantry first, especially right now. They are truly struggling. I think, especially in my local community, I found that the need for that manpower and that human power is so needed, where there's a lot of work to be done, where we're doing food deliveries and, you know, people are still in need, and like all of that resource is one that is constantly chugging away, and like I think that sort of manpower being plugged into that is definitely key. So I would say volunteer your time. I think postcards to voters is so important. So I always say that if you yourself are voting and are in tune with that, that's great. But make sure that your sphere of influence and people in your social circles and networks are also going out to vote. And if they are as well, then like people in others neighboring cities and counties, I think writing postcards to those eligible voters is super important and impactful as well. And it's a really good use of your time and something you can do from the comfort of your home. And I think it's something that like I think is really fun, because I don't really write postcards that often, nor do I receive them all that often either. I feel like I was just in that generation that just that emails everything. But it's a really exciting thing to be able to contribute to, for sure.
Great.
Yeah. So I think about this all the time because I work in electoral politics. And so often, we talk about voting in this space and then we just kind of leave it there. But before I even get into the voting thing, something that has just been sitting with me, over the past few months is we hear a lot of conversations about how can I help and how can I have the greatest impact. I think one large piece of advice I would just offer is to always, in whatever you're doing, center the most marginalized people in that space. I even look at myself, I'm a Black woman, and you'll hear a lot that we are at the intersection of gender and race. And so, if you center Black women, you can always, lift all, I always mess up these little sayings, lift all boats. Yes. But something that I, even as a Black woman, hadn't considered, I think throughout my life and activism and things like that, is the ways that there are people with more intersections than I am. And this year during Pride, I went to a counter protest to the actual Pride March here in LA. And the woman who was kind of leading the protest, it was like this punk rock band, but it was a disabled trans Afro-Latina. And I was like, that is a lot of intersections and, a lot more than I have. And just hearing her say that she didn't want to be part of the actual Pride parade because they didn't have any cars for people with disabilities, and that she physically was not able to participate in it, just really made me think about the ways that I don't spend enough time centering people who have disabilities. And so I just want to throw that out there as we're thinking about the way we engage in spaces, to really make sure we are thinking about the people who have multiple forms of oppression, and that if we lift them up, all of us will be better off. And to that, I'm always going to talk about voting. I think voting is really important, but on top of that, not ending at voting. Elections happen and politicians keep working for the people who are still paying attention. And you don't have to vote for someone for them to pay attention to you. If they know that you are engaged and you will, find someone to run against them, or just always be at their town halls and always raising hell about the things that are important to you, they will listen to you. And so once the elections are over this November, I think it's going to be really important that people keep showing up and keep demanding the things that they want, because if not, looking at the presidency, for instance, 4 years will go by. We won't see what we have wanted to see, and then wonder why we're, back in the same place.
Christine?
Well, I'll start by saying, as I recognize that we're in a democracy crisis right now, and democracy requires activism to stay healthy, strong activism, and strong and firm commitment, not anger. You can be strong and you can be firm without being angry. And so we are really at the battle for the heart and soul of democracy as we move forward. So, I had a very comfortable lifestyle, and I didn't think about politics. But when I look at what's happening now, I realize that I'm a part of what happened now. I fought hard to get Obama elected in 2008. And then I went to the inauguration, and then I sat back and said, oh, I'm done. Now I can go focus on other things like the electric grid and climate change and things like that. However, I really stopped doing my civic duty. So I really appeal to everybody, whatever you can do in your own way get up away from that television and make some calls and be active, because we are really fighting for the heart and soul of the future of all of us. And, I certainly, I even talk to my transgender community and say, it's not us. We're not fighting for the transgender community. We're fighting for every lower hierarchy of power. And it's the hierarchy of power starts at the white male, and then it goes down from there.
Yeah, we talked a lot about electoral politics here, so I just wanted to add a couple of additional thoughts. One is that I think Angry Women Make History. There were 4 books about the political power of women's anger last year written. Rebecca Traister, Brittany Cooper, Soraya, like a bunch of people wrote books on women's anger and as a force for political change. So I would just offer that I think women's anger is very useful and powerful. And the second thing I would offer is that electoral politics isn't everyone's cup of tea, but as Shaniqua and Bushra said, volunteering, staying engaged after an election is really important, and that you can tutor in your community, you can work at a food bank. There are lots of ways to get involved, but I think knowing your community and knowing what it needs makes you a really powerful leader, and that's just something I would offer. And there's never a lack of need for people's energy and support and hands. So I wanted to talk a little bit more about gender and politics. I mentioned Rebecca Traister. She talks about how as Americans, our ears are not tuned to seeing women in power. And that was like a challenge and a barrier that Hillary Clinton faced in her run. And I think it's super interesting that we have such an intersection of identities on this panel. And I'd love to know what did you feel or what have you felt in the course of your careers? You felt like people were not attuned to, that people didn't hear, that they weren't used to hearing or used to seeing in someone like you or in your colleagues. And what was that experience like for you? Again, Bushra, if you want to just.
Sure, yeah. So I think for me, one of the things that people were super just like taken aback by was like my identity being like a hijab wearing Muslim woman. And it's something that people just loved to talk about, which I also think is a cool, exciting thing to talk about as well. I think if it's something that's new, and it's a part of my identity, then yeah, absolutely, I'll talk about it. But on the flip side of that, it's funny because I would also be accused of sort of playing up identity politics. So in one side, it's all people want to talk about. Then on the other side, if you do talk about it, it's, you just can't win type thing. But what's interesting about that as well was I was sort of every single instance I found myself where that was sort of put at the forefront. So while I was running for my county commissioner seat back in 2018, 2017, I got a lot of really exciting media attention and press coverage for my run for office. Yet each almost headline that came out said, young Muslim teen runs for public office, or, Muslim teenager does blank or X, and it didn't really have my name. So at the end of all of that, people still didn't know who I was, and it wasn't really translating to additional votes or additional support at the polling place or anything like that. So I think that's something that I found to be particularly challenging, because it's like on one side, I know my identity is being played up by both fronts. And I'm trying to make the most of it, trying to see ways that maybe this can be used to my advantage, being a candidate, someone vying for public office, but it inevitably didn't. And I think that's something that I found to be particularly difficult. And a funny story is that one time I had a debate between my 2 male opponents and there was a news article that highlighted that debate at the end of it, and it talked about the 2 policy ideas that each respective male opponent presented. And it said, and Bushra Amiwala wore a stylish light pink hijab to the forum. And it's really instances like that really erases and mutes, my policy ideas and what I stood for, and the change that I sought to bring into the county commissioner seat, especially during that time. So all of that I found to be particularly challenging and difficult. And I think that there was something about it being super new to people. Having a hijab wearing Muslim woman, I guess, running for political office. But since then, it's super exciting. We have 2 Muslim women in Congress now. And I know a lot more Muslim women that are elected to political office and have ran for political office themselves. It's been easier to connect with them. So I know it's not a rare thing anymore, which is great. And it's really exciting. And I'm just hoping that for future people who do choose to run, that their identity is not placed before their policies.
Yeah, I think for me, kind of the two of the main things that have kind of, I don't want to say plagued my career, maybe that's the right word, maybe it's too strong, but very early on in my life, actually, people have made assumptions about me because of my name. There are a lot of negative stereotypes associated with the name Shaniqua. I once Googled it and saw a definition on Urban Dictionary that was just awful. And because of that, I've spent like a lot of my life trying to be, you know, super professional and like come off as not too aggressive and things like that. So, you know, trying to figure out how to operate in that space in the political world was sometimes often. But I think even kind of the bigger difficulty I faced when I worked on Capitol Hill, I would often have meetings with male colleagues, a lot of the time more junior than me, and we would meet with, you know, people who run companies or just from different organizations, and I would be talking, and then they'd ask their question to the man, and then I would answer their question, and then they would go back to the man. And then I always did this thing where if they wouldn't stop doing that, I'd make them think we were not going to do whatever it is that they were asking for, and then they would start paying attention to me. But you know, that's very different from a woman running for office. But if that is happening in a meeting on Capitol Hill, regardless of me saying I am the person who will make this decision, then, you know, you think about a lot of the women who are running for office who never have that one-on-one interaction with the people who are assuming they are not capable, and don't even get the opportunity to say, hey, you're wrong, I am capable, let me tell you why. So, you know, we're still going to have to do a lot to fix that. I do think it's changing. I think that with, you know, Hillary Clinton's campaign, although she didn't win, I think we're seeing a lot of, you know, for lack of a better term, this is cliche, but a lot more cracks in the glass ceiling. But we also still have a lot longer to go. You know, I looked at the primary between Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders, and toward the end of our primary this cycle with Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden. And it was really interesting to me, you know, Joe Biden and Hillary Clinton aren't that different on paper, but Bernie Sanders was able to do a lot better against Hillary Clinton. You know, there were states where Bernie had won just about every county in a state, and then this year he didn't. And so it's hard for me not to think that sexism didn't play some role in how well Bernie Sanders was able to do in 2016 versus 2020.
Yeah. Christine?
Yes, you know, in the campaign, I heard a lot. There was a lot. I did deal with a lot of issues, but in fact, I got many death threats, and you know, I was proud to get death threats from the Proud Boys because that means I'm doing the right thing. But the point was, most of those threats were more directed to me as a woman rather than being transgender. I certainly expected to, you know, as we've got a national and international press, to get a number of threats. But it was interesting that most of them are the same things that I noticed are said to women by some of the, you know, the haters online. But I will say, you know, when we talk about trying to be heard, that's one of my first experiences in my transition. I was with a group of male CEOs, and I had said something in the morning, they didn't hear me. I said something in the afternoon, they didn't hear me. And then later on, someone, oh yeah, Christine said that this morning. My daughter pointed out, that's not transphobia, that's being a woman. So one of the things that I heard in the campaign, which was really interesting, was, wow, I expected you to be different. What they were saying is they expected me to behave like a woman. And when you know, all I wanted to be was a woman in life, but I realized, you know, that's not entirely true. There's, you know, we're fighting in a world, you think about the world we're fighting in, we're fighting against power, money, and testosterone. And if anybody questions that, you know, please go watch, you know, go get Roger Stone on Netflix or watch the story about Epstein on next week. But this is what we're up against. So we have to be strong, and we have to fight for each other. We have to amplify each other. But I did see I will tell you one very interesting story. You know, I expected to be attacked for being transgender. I didn't expect my first attack to come from the left, from the progressives. And it caught me off guard. I would start every campaign speech, and I still do it today if I'm going to do a talk. I say, I am a proud and out transgender woman. And that's all I would say, and I move right to policy. But what I was attacked about was I was running on gender politics. No, but meanwhile, my male opponent, who I can say I beat by a large number, he would be able to tell the story about he was a young man and he hunted and he did all these things. Yet I couldn't use that one line that I'm a proud and out transgender woman. Of course I could use it, but it annoyed people. But it really started with the progressives. So I would also say we got a lot of earned media. So, you know, following up on that discussion about the Hajj, it's earned media. What people heard was I always talked about policy, but I was happy to give interviews with any news in the world who wanted to have a transgender interview because I could immediately move into policy. And that's, so anytime you get that media, and if you look, if you watch Roger Stone's technique, he would say even bad media is good media. So if you know how to spin it for a good purpose. Now, of course, he didn't spin it for a good purpose.
Yeah, I think this is all really interesting. And I think we've talked a lot about challenges and barriers women face. I also think that there are a lot of opportunities, as Bashar alluded to earlier, about how something that you might be insecure about or think is a weakness can actually be a strength of yours. And so I'd love for us to go through and have each of you share what you think some of the benefits of being a woman in the positions that you've had have been. And I think Christine articulated really nicely about how identity politics is a term that's used against people who have marginalized identities, but I thought it was really important that you said that men and people who are white and people who are straight and people who are able-bodied also have identities and they leverage them constantly. I think that no one has been a bigger user of identity politics than Donald Trump. And it doesn't really get called out as that. So I just thought I'd name that. But I wanna talk both about and ask each of you to speak a little bit about ways you think your identity has been helpful, created opportunities, created ways for you to be in connection with people, be a voice for your constituents or for those who you're trying to elevate in ways that maybe otherwise wouldn't be possible. And also about community and allyship and how all of that has worked for you. And again, kind of same order.
Mm-hmm. I think that being a woman, I have been so grateful and blessed to have been sort of in conjunction and also in partnership with so many other women going through the same thing. Like there's just like an instant bond that becomes formed with them. And I think that it's really nice. It's like this unconditional support that comes from this unsaid, almost just again support that comes from just being a woman as well. And I think that that's something that's been really nice for me, especially while running for office, like finding other women who are also running for the first time. Like they were super supportive, always, liking, commenting on each other's like posts and everything and things of that sort. But I think one of the greatest advantages, in my opinion, of being a woman, and again, this is something that is just this higher degree and sense of empathy that we bring into the world and the way that we shape the way that we view things as well. So I think that that's been really nice. And I think that that sort of support and that group and that network of women has been so, I've been lucky and I haven't seen anything like that on the flip side. And I think that that's one of the greatest like blessings of being a woman and as such. So that's been super helpful and everything. But yeah, other than that, I think it's easier to sometimes focus on like the challenges and the difficulties that come with being a woman. And also, I don't know how much of like the advantages of like my campaign or like just things in the past have been because of being a woman or because of just like who I am as a person or because of other external circumstances. But I definitely know that the home-based support of women that I found, other women who run for office, other women who are engaged politically, civically, and similar minded like that, like all that support that they bring to the table is one that I know definitely has to do with the woman bond, like the female identity for sure.
Yeah, I'd say for me, this just kind of taking advantage of any sexism that comes my way, and not in a weird way, but like people often make assumptions about me because I'm a woman. And, you know, as I mentioned before, because of my name, I've always tried to appear as very, you know, kind of agreeable. But because of that, people often underestimate me. They think I won't go the extra mile. They think I won't call them out or, you know, be a person that can challenge them, and allowing people to think that for as long as possible until you kind of get everything done that you need to get done. And then you get whatever it is you are working toward, you know, for better or worse, is kind of a good thing. People have said to me so many times, oh, I wasn't expecting that out of you. And for me, I just say, oh, well, that was your assumption. I'm sorry you had it, but here we are right now. And then just to build off of, you know, what Busher said about community, I don't think I would have as many women friends if I wasn't a woman. And there's just this unspoken bond, I think, that exists when you're meeting new women, that you don't have to say all the things for them to understand what you're talking about, what you're going through, and where you're coming from. And then I think generally, even when I think about conversations about race, women just generally are more open to having those conversations and just being wrong, you know, and hearing where they can do better and be better. You know, I think about myself in that regard. You know, I don't know why I feel the need to say not all men, but a lot of men, you know, you can't do that. You can't explain to them how things they are doing are harmful. And those conversations are a lot harder to have.
Well, you know, I'm going to call this an Instagram moment. When I say an Instagram moment, it's because, you know, as I am doing this interview and listen to the very orderly and the polite fashion that we're dealing with each other, I want to take a picture of that because, you know, I've been working with a primarily female board for a long time. And one of the nice things, first of all, I love being a transgender woman. I don't say I'm a woman because I didn't have the early childhood experiences of being a woman, but I do recognize that, you know, we allow each other space, and it's a much more collaborative feeling. And I'm on this interview, and I have no anxiety. But when I will tell you, just yesterday, I was in what's called a technical subcommittee of the board, which was all men other than myself, and it was stressful because people jump in on each other and you have to be on your toes to fill in that space. So I kind of bring that up to the point where I do think women have a much more collaborative way of working for each other. And now I'll move back to business. You know, what's led to my business success in the past was the recognition that we get the best answer through diversity and the best answer through a diverse set of opinions. And if we can do that in a way that's non-threatening and polite, and where people are not afraid to speak up, we get the best ideas. So I do think as we move to a more feminine approach of leadership, we're going to get higher quality results.
I think that's so right. It's super interesting to me the way leadership is gendered as masculine, and masculine traits are deemed to be leadership traits. And I personally think that leaders need to do things that are more stereotypically female as opposed to women trying to model male leadership, which is not super effective. There are lots of studies that show that. So I'm going to start asking questions that are currently in the Q&A. So for people watching, if you have additional questions, please put them in the Q&A. So one question that Susan asked was, what recommendations do you have for us to truly get to know our community members' needs during this time of social distancing with less opportunity for interaction in person among neighbors in places like local churches, classes, shopping, etc.? And Busher, I'm going to have you answer the question because you're just because of your role.
Yeah. That's such a challenging question and super difficult, I guess. And it's going to be different for every community as well. But I know for my community, we have this connected virtually, which has been really nice. So we've created a separate Facebook group, and I know not everyone uses Facebook, but it's a start, and I think it's a good avenue to be able to connect with people online. And especially for me, like I've always been a huge proponent of social media and using it for its good and its advantages. So we've created a Facebook group where it's like a COVID help center group. So where people are able to put in like sort of what they need, what they're looking for, what their needs are. And with all of that in mind, I think people are able to sort of also, I guess, uplift and amplify one another's voices on there as well. So they're able to, I guess, like add things on, and also just say like, yeah, like I need that too, or like, here's what I can do to help and support. So that's been one way that I think has been good to stay connected. It's to use social media to one's advantage. But I think other than Facebook groups, it is really challenging to find the needs of our community. I know, like, we're being on the Board of Education, we have letters written from our community members that give us a firsthand look of what it's like, and seeing all the challenges and difficulties with e-learning right now, like that's an easy way for us to know how the community is doing with the e-learning and everything like that. We've gone fully remote in our Board of Education. So I think other than those two things, like I can't really think of like a creative means and avenues to truly stay connected with our board members and other community members. But I 100% think that the Facebook group thing has been super successful, and and when people create it, there's like a ripple effect. Like it's like you create it, you add 10 people, those 10 people add 10 people, and really it can grow super quickly like that.
Yeah, I would also add that mutual aid networks have really popped up all around the country. And so I would like Google the name of your city or your town and the word mutual aid, and you might be surprised what you found. That's the way I've been most plugged in. Shaniqua, I'd like to ask you the question of what is the role of media in politics? What do you think needs to change, especially when it comes to cable news?
Cable news. You know, I think this week is a perfect example of kind of some of what is wrong, just generally actually with our kind of media ecosystem. When I think about the fact that we're in the middle of an election, I really think the media should be educating the public. And particularly when I think about cable news, they are doing the exact opposite. 2016 was a perfect example of that. A lot of media now, instead of reporting on politics and telling us, you know, Joe Biden went to this place and talked about this issue. It's always, what are the optics? What are the political optics on this thing that someone did? And now everyone in the world is a political pundit. And, you know, thinking about the Democratic primary, oh, I want to vote for this person, but I don't think they can win because I know how my neighbors will vote. So I'm going to vote for this other person. And they've just created this world where I think civic engagement and politics are now a bit of a sport instead of just giving us the information we need. And there's been a lot of conversation this week about the Hatch Act, which is supposed to prevent political activity while federal workers are working on the clock. And so the Republican National Convention is happening right now. And you know, the White House, stuff is happening in the White House that shouldn't be, because the convention is a political thing. And there's been hot takes in the media that the American public does not care about the Hatch Act, so there's no need to make a big deal about it. But if the media was telling us about the Hatch Act and why it was such a big deal that it's been violated, not just during this convention, but so many times before, then maybe the public would care. And so I think the media plays a huge role, and I think they are failing and have been failing. And, you know, I'm not blaming the media for Donald Trump being president, but they definitely played a huge role. And one last thing I'll add in about Crooked specifically, that is why our founders started the company. They thought the way that media was handling politics was, you know, a lot of forced, not even forced, but like perceived objectivity that was actually just trying to balance a truth and a lie. And so they wanted to start a company where there could just be an honest conversation about what's happening. But the other part of that was the news is always talking about what's wrong. They don't tell people how they can actually get engaged and fix the things that they see are wrong, which is kind of the point of my job at Crooked. And, you know, I saw this mentioned in the comments, so I'll just kind of plug it here, but we have a program called Adopt a State. And so if you live, for instance, in California or in a really blue place or even a really red place, and you want to get plugged in and help flip 6 of the states that will be really important to flipping the White House, you can go to votesaveamerica.com/adopt. And we send out specific calls to action every week that you can take for that state to help not only flip it for the White House, but the Senate, state legislatures, and the House of Representatives.
Great. Christine, I'm going to tee up for you a few questions that are in the chat about running for office. I'm going to ask 3 questions, but they are all kind of in the same vein. One is, for someone who wants to get into politics but has no political experience, what do you recommend the first position they run for is? When it comes to running for elected office, isn't fundraising a huge barrier if no one knows your name? If so, how do we encourage everyday women to run for office if it's going to bankrupt us? And then the last was, if you're exploring for office, do you recommend reaching out to orgs like Run for Something, Vote Run Lead, things like that?
Well, yeah, in terms of what to run for, I would say run for any office you think you can get into. To start out, and I've talked to a lot of people who are running for office, and sometimes they reach too high, and I admit I may have reached too high as well. But I did have a lot of earlier office experience with local, get involved locally. And if you look what's happened today, it was actually a strategy that started in the 80s in Reagan era for the Republicans to staff all these offices with people. And eventually you get to the point where you have power. So I would encourage everybody to run for an office that they can win and start there. Now, as far as fundraising goes, it's a huge challenge. Running for governor, I was supposed to spend 75% of my time on the phone making calls for money. I probably spent about 60%. I could have spent more time, but we're up against, unfortunately, that's the reality of fundraising. You have to get over that fear of asking for money. And in politics today, it's expected. So unfortunately, money is big. And I'd love to see all of our like-minded folks, like we're on the phone with today or watching today, get into politics to change some of these things. Citizens United was probably one of the biggest and most the most terrible things that happened, because Citizens United, treating a corporation as a person and allowing all this money, is difficult to fight against when you're trying to run without corporate money. I ran without taking corporate money. So anyway, and then of course, yes, of course, work with any organization you can. One of the things that my campaign team did right away was set me down for training with the progressive campaign group. Had training at 4-day training in Washington. It was very valuable to work with those groups.
We only have a couple minutes left, so I just want to give everyone a chance. If you have any closing thoughts, one takeaway you would want people from here to take. Maybe we have 3 minutes left, so each of you could maybe take a minute of any last thoughts, final takeaways.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and say, we've really sunk to a low place, and we, over the long term, can get out of this. And we can get out of this by everybody's civic involvement. And it's very important because, one of the other things we need to do is also change the nature of the Supreme Court. And all that, we have to be in this for the long haul.
Yeah, and I can jump in next. We have seen over this past week, honestly, for the past 4 or 5 months, if I'm counting correctly, a lot of protests in response to police violence and just racial injustice in general. And, those protests get a lot of coverage, but I think that they always end, at least the coverage of them, end at the protest. And as I was saying before, voting is one part of civic engagement. I think political protest is another part. And I just hope that everyone on this call today finds where they can fit into what I always refer to as the continuum of activism. You can protest in the street, that is one form of it, but there are also, giving financial contributions to people who are running for office, and not just federal office. Prosecutors are elected, sheriffs are elected. There are so many elected offices that we can kind of weigh in. If you are showing up to city council meetings, that's a form of activism. And just leaning on elected officials to do what you want them to do. If you have a huge platform, speaking to your audience and letting them, know what they can do to get involved. But whatever tools or resources you have, there is a way to do something. And especially as I've kind of come from where the space I was in growing up as a child to where I am now, I'm in a lot different circles. And then especially after going to Harvard, which is a whole other story of things that happen in elite spaces. But I now am encountering people that are a lot further away from the issues that are happening on the ground. So wherever you are, using that space to really pull those stories up and make sure that people are engaging in a way that, you know, feels comfortable to them, but still advances all of these things that we're seeing, start from there.
And just to close out, I'll say just do more in any which way that you can. Do more. And if you're doing a lot right now, which I know so many of us are, don't spread yourself too thin. Burnout is super real, but do more intentionally. Being intentional and mindful about just the type of work that we can be doing out there is super important to me. That's truly what I would say right now. So voting is super important. I think if you have the inclination to running for something, that's something that's super rare. Not everyone has the idea that they should possibly run for something. So if that thought crosses your mind, I would definitely say listen to it, because that's not something that the average person just thinks of doing every day. So if you ever think that running for office is something that might interest you, then go ahead and I think do it. I think about it. I think definitely explore the idea that comes with it. And yes, there are so many external factors that make things like getting involved in those different ways so much more intimidating than it actually is. But it's such a rewarding and fruitful experience that I would wholeheartedly recommend it to anyone who has interest in that regard.
Great. Thank you so much to all of our panelists. I know we're ending a little bit early. I got confused on the time, but I think we're ending on a really strong note. So I want to close it out here and encourage those who are listening to our social media handles were shared, to follow along, to stay plugged in. And thanks, everyone. I want to turn it back over to the Ellevate team in case they have anything they want to close out with.
All right, well, thank you, Aditi, Bushra, and Christine. Oh, my screen just switched, sorry about that. Christine and Shaniko, and of course, Senator Gillibrand, for a great session today. And thanks so much to all of you who joined this discussion. Remember, Mobilize Women will be taking place for the rest of the week, so mark your calendars for the next session. Invite your friends, spread the word on social media using hashtag Mobilize Women, and show some love. These conversations matter more than ever, and we want to reach as wide of an audience as possible. After all, there's strength in numbers, and we believe together we can change the world. Special thanks to our Mobilize Women's Week sponsors, RBC Wealth Management, Accenture, Guardian Life, Lincoln Financial Group, Unilever, NFP, Baker Hostetler, Columbia Business School, London Stock Exchange Group, Fiera Capital, and MM Lafleur. We greatly appreciate your support. Coming up, we have 2 sessions in a couple of hours, both taking place from 3 to 4 p.m. EDT. Hopefully I can see you at the Managing Your Unconscious Bias Roundtable, featuring Dr. Monique Harrison, a PhD, or at the Roundtable Holding Space for Black Women. If you haven't already, sign up to become a free member today and invite others at ellevatenetwork.com, and go to mobilizewomen2020.com to have a true Mobilize Women experience where actions speak louder than words. You'll find the Learn, Act, and Engage buttons for each sessions, which link to a bunch of great resources. Before we say goodbye, please again, don't forget to text Mobilize to 26797 to get help registering to vote, make a plan to vote, and keep track of voter deadlines. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.